Hey, all right. How's it going? Horror Talk Radio. I'm your host, MrDeadman. And tonight we're talking about horror movies, horror games with David Szymanski. How's it going, man?
Hello, it is going well.
Did I butcher your last name or not?
Not too badly. Actually, I think that's closer to the correct pronunciation than I pronounce it. So, because I say Szymanski because I don't know. I always have pronounced it Szymanski, but I think the actual Polish pronunciation is something like Szymanski or something like that. I don't know. So really, any way you can pronounce it that isn't just any way you can pronounce it is good. You have Z's following S's, and when you have a name that has Z's following S's and stuff like that, any way that someone can actually say the name and get through it is the correct pronunciation.
All right, well, that sounds good with me. That's how I roll with just about every name. I will pronounce it how it makes sense to me, and if I make a mistake, correct me live. That's fine. That's what happens. So, David Szymanski, Z-Monkey, sorry. For those who don't know who are you, and what do you do?
I am an independent game developer. I'm a bunch of things, I guess, but indie game developer is probably the closest to accurately summarizing what I do. Most people probably know me for making Dusk. I've also I've also done an assortment of smaller, lesser-known horror games, and I work with New Blood Interactive doing random things, basically.
Okay. And that's what I was going to ask you, too. I know we talked a little bit before going live, but just help me understand this, and I think for those out there, too. So, you developed Dusk, but are you also part of, like, New Blood? Are you all connected?
Yeah, excuse me. New Blood is sort of a developer / publisher, and pretty much anyone who's having a game published by New Blood is part of this sort of melting pot internally, where there are some people who go around and assist with different things, and some people who are just they're solely developing one game, and it's a big mess essentially. Dave likes to describe it as a group of friends who make games, which is probably the closest summation you can get. And I'm just in there as part of that mess. Of course, primarily I'm the Dusk guy because I made Dusk. But I'm not the only Dusk guy, especially now. There's a couple of New Blood guys who are doing just as much work on Dusk, more at this point, on things like the SDK and the Switch port and things like that.
Oh, the Switch port. That's right. Dusk is going to the Switch.
Yeah, hopefully soon.
And about that, do you guys have to censor it? Because I know back in the day, Nintendo was crazy on censorship, but do you guys have to take out the blood and...
Let's put it this way. Postal Redux just got released on Switch uncensored.
This is a crazy time we live in, man. I mean, the 90s Nintendo would have never allowed that. But the current Nintendo is allowing that. While PlayStation and Xbox are censoring anime titties and other stuff and blood, Nintendo is allowing that. I am baffled. I'm actually baffled here.
It's pretty hilarious to have a Postal game on a Nintendo console. So no, we didn't have to censor anything. We just had to get it rated.
That's great. That's great. I love that. Let Nintendo be, I think what they call it, based. Yeah, let Nintendo be that. The last bastion of real gaming right there. Well, besides PC. Okay. Anyway.
Right. Always PC.
So let me ask about the origin story here behind Dusk, because I'll try not to fanboy too hard on this. It's one of my favorite games. Okay. If you guys have not played it, I'm sure you have before. I'm stuck in 90s games. I still play Duke Nukem. I still play Quake. I still play Doom, especially Brutal Doom. But Dusk is right up my alley. But so the fanboying is over. So yeah, what happened?
So I mean, there's a bunch we could talk about, but the the too long didn't read version is I got done making all these the series of 4 sort of small narrative-driven horror games, and they were all very similar in style. They were all, I guess, what some people would call walking simulators. They were all very narrative-driven. They were all pretty serious. Probably very surprisingly serious if you just know me from Dusk, because Dusk is very much not serious.
Oh, yeah. That's what makes it fun, though.
Yeah. But for a variety of different reasons, I ended up getting kind of burnt out. And to remedy that, I decided that I would, instead of doing what I had been doing, which is finishing one game and then immediately jumping into the next one, that I'd take a little bit of time and just kind of do whatever, brainstorm stuff, play around with different things. And out of that, one day, I started making this... Well, I started out by just having like a gun attached to the camera because I wanted to make a Quake shotgun and put it on a camera just for fun. Okay. And that, of course, rapidly turned into a low poly, low fidelity shooter thing of some sort, which also then rapidly turned into a retro FPS. And I worked on that for... can't even remember how long, a couple months at least, on my own. And then on a whim, I sent this sort of rough proof of concept. It was really just, it was like a few rooms with a bunch of stuff you could interact with and a bunch of different weapons. And there weren't even really any enemies. It was mostly just like the interactivity and the movement and the systems and stuff.
Or like picking up objects and stuff.
Yeah, opening cupboards up and jump pads and swimming and just random stuff like that. And on a whim, I sent that to Dave Oshry just because I knew he'd worked on the 2013 Rise of the Triad reboot, which cool. I had actually really liked, even though it's... Well, anyone who knows me knows that it wasn't even though it was a janky mess. It was probably in part because it was a janky mess, because that's sort of my type of games. I love things that are janky and weird and like just
like, I think you even have a love for Daikatana too, right? And
yeah,
people could say like Daikatana's kind of messed up, but there's...
Yeah, very. So I just sent that to him, thinking that, he had a Twitter following, and I was like, maybe he'll like tweet about this and help me get a little bit of traction there. And instead, he got back to me and wanted to publish it just based on that demo, which is hilarious to think back now because I'm not sure that would happen now. I think we've gotten a little more picky over the years, or Dave's gotten more picky, whereas like I'm not sure that this really rough demo with no actual gameplay in it would be enough to convince him. But at that point it was. Then Dusk became a New Blood game, and, we went from there.
Man, that is a good story. I like that. And you're right. I mean, New Blood is probably more picky. I don't know. There is maximum action, and that was a... I mean, it pretty much was a sandbox game.
That was a bit janky, yeah.
I love that too.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's part of the charm.
So, but Dusk has a lot of horror elements in it. I mean, where did that stem from? Did that stem from like your previous horror games, or was that influence from movies? Like, what happened?
Kind of. Well, there's not that much in Dusk that say is direct. Well, I think if you were to play Dusk and compare it with like earlier horror stuff I did, you would not be like, oh yeah, I see the similarities. Because like I said, the previous stuff that I did was very narrative focused. And in fact, originally that was when I made my first horror game in, what was it, 2014, I think. Mm-hmm. That was around the time where things like Slender clones were still kind of the way a lot of indie horror was. Not just Slender clones, but kind of that idea of like, you're going around, you're going around a place and you're doing a thing, and there's going to be stuff that jumps out at you, or there's going to be something that's like trying to kill you.
Yeah.
And the first game I made or the first horror game I made rather was Fingerbones, which the whole idea was to like subvert that expectation and make it about more narrative, sort of psychological, realistic horror. And of course, the funny thing is now like things are completely switched, where a lot of indie horror is very much driven on like I hate to use the term walking simulator because I feel like for a lot of people that has negative connotations. But a lot of indie horror is now very sort of atmosphere and aesthetic driven, and not so much gameplay driven. So
right.
Things have kind of switched in that regard. But
or like hide and seek stuff, like Granny, or was it Granny or Grandma? What's the game?
Granny, I think.
Yeah,
I think it's called Granny.
Where you just run around and try to run from she's blind. She's blind, but she hears you. Man,
something like that. Yeah, that one's actually pretty gameplay driven. I'm thinking of a lot of the like, especially a lot of the PSX influenced ones. Surprisingly.
Okay.
Yeah, with maybe the exception of like Puppet Combo stuff, which is always, which has been the same thing since what did he say, 2011? I think he started.
Mm-hmm.
He has done the same exact, not same exact game, but it's like he has a style and a brand, and he sticks to it. It's the same, very consistent throughout all these years. But anyway, so the long meandering story short, I don't know that anyone would play Dusk and see those similarities horror-wise, but I guess you could say there is kind of the same values in it, in that I've always been really focused on pacing and tension building as opposed to scares. And I think the parts in Dusk that people talk about the most are the ones where I focused a lot on building up the suspense before something happened. Like, the big one is in E2M2, where you first meet the Wendigo.
Oh, man. Like, no. Yeah, I hate that part. I hate it, and I love it. That part.
Everything about that level was designed to point toward that moment of the Wendigo reveal.
And you did solid right there, because everything up until that point is like action and intensive, and like it just throwing hordes of enemies, and in this one level where it's like they're all dead. What?
Yeah, and that's another thing I always harp on, is that the heart and soul of horror, or of really anything, if you doing anything successfully in creative medium, is, in my opinion, context. Mm-hmm. Which is that a thing does not just exist on its own. It exists relative to all the other things that surround it.
Right.
And those things that surround it are what make that thing really work. So in E2M2, the idea was, okay, previous to this, first of all, every single level has started with music except for the final boss level of episode 1. So that when you go into E2M2, there is no music to start with. That's already putting you on edge, because it's weird and different, and it's and then in addition to that, you are going through and there is no enemies. You're just finding dead things, and that was actually inspired by, I had this memory of playing Blood and playing I can't remember exactly which level number it is, but it's the level The Haunting. And this memory I had was of playing that and going for the longest time in this level without encountering enemies, and that just being like really surprisingly freaky.
Yeah, Blood throws enemies at you left and right.
Now the funny thing is, going back, now and replaying it, I don't know how that ever would have happened, because I'd replay that level and I'm still encountering enemies fairly regularly. But that idea of it being like going through a retro FPS level and not finding anything, and having that just not fit and making you, nervous, that like stuck with me, and so I wanted to put that in also. Excuse me.
Well, you did well.
And then of course there's all the, you're hearing weird noises, you're seeing things that are like, don't go in the ruins, and then you have to go in the ruins, and then it's going down and getting dark, and then you hear a little bit of music starting back up. Anyway, the point is, like, all of this is the context given to preparing you for the moment when the Wendigo shows up. If I had just started that level and you go into a room and there's a Wendigo, no one would remember that. So I think that definitely is something that carried over from the previous games that I'd made, because that was something that I experimented a lot with them, is like using not a lot of material to try and do a lot. Like if you play the Moon Sliver, for instance, there's like not really that much that happens in that game. It's like scare-wise, it's mostly all just narrative build-up and atmospheric build-up and stuff for like one moment at the very end. And then as far as other media goes, there's a very obvious Texas Chainsaw Massacre influence in some parts of the game, because that is my favorite horror movie.
Yeah, right away from the beginning, man. From the very beginning.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, Dusk opens with a great opener immediately.
Because there is no opener. The opener is things are trying to kill you. Figure out how to not die.
Yes.
That is your introduction. And what's surprising is, it's surprising how few people I've seen play the game actually, like it's very rare for someone to die in that encounter. Even someone who is like brand new to, well, not brand new, but I should say someone who's obviously not experienced with FPS games.
Yeah.
It's still relatively rare for me to see someone die during that, and it's even more rare to see someone die twice.
Now, how often do they run around like not knowing what to do?
It's usually there's a period of time where they don't understand like the attack patterns of the leathernecks, and they don't quite know how to hit them without taking damage or things like that. But I've never seen anyone get stuck there, and it's always like, it's supposed to be a frantic moment. So
yeah, it is frantic. I think the first time I played it, I was running around like, wow, what do I do? Where do I go? I found the some crawl space, and there's a gun in there or something, and I was like, oh, okay, I can use this. Bye-bye.
Yeah, there's a couple different ways you can deal with that situation, but the thing is, it's kind of faked, because you're actually given quite a bit of health and armor. You can basically stand there and tank their hits for the most part, well, depending on what difficulty you're on. But it's just supposed to be like, it's supposed to elicit that feeling of frantic, I've been dropped into the deep end, but you're really not dropped in the deep end. Like you can, and like I said, it's very rare for me to see someone actually fail there. It's just sort of tricking you into thinking that, the game is like being hard on you.
I tell you, now how many people failed at the Wendigo? How many people died the first time they encountered the Wendigo? Probably 100%? Come on.
No, actually.
Oh, man.
That one I haven't seen as much, of course, because I see a lot of people play the beginning, or I have seen a lot of people play the beginning parts of Dusk because, trade shows and stuff like that. Wendigo, yeah, I'm not. I don't actually recall seeing personally anyone die there. Usually, what I see is okay. I mean, I'm sure it happens.
Dang it!
But it.
Oh man, it was on the stream too.
Oh really?
Instead of going straight, I went through the hall where you can get, I guess, the rocket launcher or something, or the equivalent of it, and I got it, and I had no idea something was behind me. I just heard this. Chee! I was like, what was that? And something was hitting me. I was like, what's attacking me? What's attacking me? I can't see it. And finally I see it, and it has a last blow, and I die. I'm like, what the hell was that thing? It looks freaky when you see it. Like, it's like...
Yeah, the Skinwalker. That was actually, Mark Diaz gave me that idea. He's a programmer at id. He was just randomly like, hey, have you ever heard of like Wendigos and Skinwalkers and stuff like that? It's like, I just thought this would be a really cool thing to have in the game. And I'm like, you are correct, sir. That's a very cool thing to have in the game.
That is a cool thing. They are like my most hated enemies, but they're a cool. If I see them in a group, they're like the first thing I try to get. I'm like, I don't, because it's invisible enemies, man. And anytime there's an invisible enemy, I'm like, I can't. I gotta get rid of that thing as soon as possible.
Oh. So, Amnesia was probably rough for you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Freaking water monster. It's the part of that game everyone remembers.
Man, my weakness is horror games. I mean, if I boot up a horror game and I start playing it, I start freaking out. I start screaming. Like, what was it? what was that game? I think it was on the Xbox, and you had a camera. You went to an asylum. Man, what was that called?
Oh, Outlast.
Outlast. Yeah, yeah. You had to run into lockers and stuff to survive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, the first monster killed me one time, and then I realized after you survive that, you're trying to survive against crackheads that are trying to like kill you. I'm like, why can't you just beat them up? I mean,
yeah. One thing that Dylan and I have talked about is like, if they just gave you like condemned gameplay in Outlast, it would immediately be like a much better game.
Yeah.
if they just give you like a lead pipe or something.
Because that's what it was. It reminded me of Condemned, except you don't have the power to just grab a lead pipe and use it.
Yeah.
Man. So now the what is the most? What were the hurdles and the obstacles you had to overcome when developing Dusk?
Jeez, again, there's so many to talk about. I think the biggest one was probably just the fact that Dusk is a massive game, and I didn't do everything in that game on my own, but I did like 90% of it on my own. There was the New Blood guys headed up the multiplayer for the most part, and I had some programming assistance in some areas, and there's one guy who touched up the UI and stuff. So, other people did work on Dusk, but for the most part, like all the content, the textures, the animations, the models, the gameplay, the levels, all of that was like done from scratch by me.
Wow.
Which was a ton of work.
Yeah.
And it toward the end of episode 3, completing Dusk episode 3 is one of the hardest things I've ever done, because it was just at that point I was so mentally drained.
That's the one where you hit the sword, right?
Yeah.
The nameless city?
Yeah. It was like Dave and the guys kind of had to drag me over the finish line in some ways, because I was just done. And the fact that episode 3 also, it's like the bar set by episode 2 was really high, and then getting to episode 3, I'm like, I have no idea how to outdo that. So there was like this constant pressure to do everything better and crazier, on top of feeling burnt out, and also putting a lot of I felt a lot of pressure to get it done as quickly as possible. That's entirely my own. Like, I put that on myself. It wasn't like Dave was going, "You hurry up, we gotta." Dave was actually being like, "It's fine. You can, you don't have to kill yourself doing this." But I felt like I had to kill myself doing it. And I think that was the hardest part of development, is just dealing with all of that. And honestly, it's still something I'm kind of recovering from. In some ways, even though it's been, how long at this point? Are we coming up on 2 years?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's.
I mean, do you ever get do you ever get any annoying messages or people saying, "Where's Dusk 2 going to be?"
I get messages about that all the time.
Oh, well, that's not for me.
And I've been very open about the fact that Dusk 2 is not happening anytime soon. And part of that is just because of how how massive an undertaking Dusk 1 was. It's like, I'm not going to immediately jump into doing that again, especially now. Like, I started Dusk, I started Dusk with 0 children, and now I have 2.
Yeah.
So, there's no way that I could. Yeah, they do.
Energy.
There's absolutely no way that I could do the Dusk development cycle with 2 children.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I did part of it one, and that was already, super draining. But it doesn't mean Dusk 2 will never happen. It's just that, it's not happening. It's not in development. I've briefly considered some ideas. That's the other thing, is that I used up a whole bunch of my ideas with Dusk. Like, I basically put maybe not every idea I've ever had for an FPS, but I put about like a decade worth of, or a decade or more worth of thinking about what I wanted to put in a retro FPS into Dusk. So, that to make Dusk 2, I will need more ideas than just do more Dusk.
Right.
Although maybe people would be happy with that. I don't know.
And you definitely don't want to do it if the heart's not in it. I mean, then you're just going to end up like something like Duke Nukem Forever or something, and it's just going to be like, God, that's horrible.
I'm not in a rush I'm not in a rush to put out another full Dusk game. I also would like, I'd like to be more than just the guy that made Dusk.
Right.
I want to have other stuff out there. Not just because, I want to be known for more, but also because like I don't want to have all my ducks in just the one basket. Because the game industry is not an easy industry.
It does not seem like it. It does not.
Yeah.
Now, and you're right. I mean, episode 3 I thought was really good. It was a good way. It was a good idea to switch with a sword. That thing changed the gameplay up quite a bit.
Yeah, sword's fun.
And episode 2 was wild, man. It was long and wild. It was man, one of my favorite levels was the one where it's like an office setting, and the floor plan kept on changing on you.
Yeah, the Escher Labs. That's one of the fan favorite ones. And the funny thing about that one is like, that whole MC Escher weirdness angle. I only adopted that because I was like having creative block as to how to make the laboratory environment interesting. Eventually, I was just like, well, I'll just make it insane. That'll make it interesting.
That will make it interesting, and it worked. It worked. I mean, hell, if you need any more creative ideas, just watch some horror movies, watch some John Carpenter movies, watch Big Trouble in Little China.
That's a fun one,
make a first-person shooter about a guy trying to find his truck. I don't know. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure you have the creative capabilities to do that. I mean, you design the levels, you design the models and all that stuff, and some people might take it for granted and be like, well, the game looks like Quake. It's still not easy, man.
Yeah, no, it's still not easy. I would say that it's not that it's not that having the game look like that makes it easier as a solo dev. It's what makes it possible as a solo dev. Like, Dusk would not exist if every level had the density of like Arcane Dimensions or if it looked like a AAA game.
Right. It has a certain look to it, a certain aesthetic, which is, I think, I'm interested in the people who play Dusk. I'm willing to bet they're probably seasoned FPS players, right? At least they grew up on Quake or something. Or
it's a mix. I've had some of my favorite messages are from people who say Dusk has gotten them into old FPSs because they never played any, and Dusk was their entry into that, which is awesome to hear. Yeah, it's a big mix of people. I've had kids who love it. Just all sorts of people.
Okay. Cool. What is I want to talk about some horror games here. Speaking of retro FPS, what is one that's taken for granted? I know most people know Doom and Quake, but what are some retro 90s first-person shooters that people just don't really seem to know or just looked over?
I always like shouting out Chasm the Rift because that was a teenagerhood favorite of mine. And it still is a game that I'm really fond of, and it's a very neat little game if you can look past some of its weirdness. I think Blood has a pretty respectable following in retro FPS circles.
Mm-hmm.
But outside of, I think Blood deserved to be as respected as Duke Nukem 3D, if not more so.
Most definitely.
Yeah, I think Blood is the best of the Build Engine games, personally. It's just phenomenal in a lot of ways.
I can see that.
I also think actually Shadow Warrior doesn't get enough credit.
Shadow Warrior's awesome.
I quite like Shadow Warrior.
That's a good game too.
Yeah.
Shadow
let's
Warrior
see what
Blood.
else. I'm a big Daikatana apologist with many caveats. That's sort of the meme on Twitter. It's that I'm the guy who likes Daikatana.
But we're not supposed to like
Doom
that one.
3 actually, I think, doesn't get enough credit. While it's very weird as a retro FPS, it's kind of not a retro FPS. It's actually a very fun game in its own right.
A Doom 3?
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when that came out, people were like, "What, you mean you can't hold a flashlight and a gun at the same time? What kind of soldier is this guy? Just put the flashlight on the gun. You're in space and you don't have that? What? That makes no sense."
Yeah, and it's funny because then they did that in BFG edition, and then everyone was like, "Oh, wait, no, go back."
Yeah.
Like, I always liked the flashlight mechanic. I actually aped that for a game I did for the first Dread X collection. I don't know if you've seen that at all.
I have not. Well, we'll get into
but I did a little shooter for that where you have it has the same flashlight mechanic from Doom 3.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I think they were trying to go for more of a horror element in that versus...
Yeah, they were.
Yeah, classic Doom, they just threw every enemy at you. It was no longer about horror. It was about, okay, what insanity can you get past?
Well, to be fair, when Doom released, that is what horror games looked like, too.
Yeah.
Like, that was... I think people forget that what was scary at that time was something... now we just see it... Like, we just see the horror elements in the original Doom as being sort of window dressing.
Yeah.
But at the time, it's like Doom terrified people, and it was meant to terrify people. That was, the start... The core design of Doom was it was supposed to be scary, dark, fast. People always forget about the scary part of that. Especially now looking back, everyone goes to the fast part.
I might say something's kind of blasphemous too. I'm a huge Doom fan, but it's hard for me to go back to the old school Doom after playing Brutal Doom. After playing that, it's
really?
Oh, well, yeah, because the Brutal Doom, it's so crazy, the carnage, and it's like, oh my god, like.
Yeah, I'm not that big of a Brutal Doom guy. I don't hate it like a lot of people do. It's just really not for me. I like the vanilla experience.
Vanilla's fine. It's just I like the carnage. I like the carnage and the craziness, and I turned into a monster. the game does get a little. Well, I would say it's easy, but I don't know. When you put on the hardest difficulty on Brutal Doom, it's pretty tough.
It's a very different sort of gameplay balance.
Oh yeah.
It definitely changes the flow of the game a lot.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. What's as far as horror games go, I mean, everyone knows the staples like Resident Evil, Silent Hill, but what's one that's overlooked, underrated?
Condemned is one of my favorite games. Period. Condemned: Criminal Origins.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also one of the most successful arguments out there for being able to make a game with genuinely good action gameplay that is also genuinely scary. And for whatever reason, that one kind of got lost to time. Like, it's known again in sort of more like FPS enthusiast circles.
Mm-hmm.
But outside of that, a lot of people kind of forgot about that.
Yeah.
About Condemned, which is sad. Let's see. I am a big Resident Evil fan. I am a Silent Hill fan.
Which one?
Let's see.
Which one of those do you think is more horror? Silent Hill or Resident Evil?
Oh, jeez. Silent Hill, definitely.
Yeah, that's an easy one.
I mean, I think that the Resident Evil remake for GameCube is like game design perfection, but I wouldn't peg any Resident Evil game as being like terrifying. At most
Right.
they're like tense or intense and entertaining sort of horror. Silent Hill, at least the original ones, are like genuinely scary.
They are, man, and scary in a psychological way. I mean, Resident Evil 2 was more about the shadows and the creepy monsters, the zombies, and
Yeah,
the lickers and
it's
all
a
that.
fun sort of horror. I'm not disparaging Resident Evil at all because I love Resident Evil, but it's just, Silent Hill. Silent Hill to me is much more about trying to be seriously, horror, whereas Resident Evil is more like sort of B-movie horror, but like in a good way.
Yeah, I agree. What about I always try to bring up this one. Was it Eternal Darkness for GameCube? You mentioned GameCube.
Yeah. I've surprisingly never played that one. I mean, I know all about it.
I am a fan of it. I'm like the only one. I know I'm not the only fan, but I mean, if you like Lovecraft elements, it uses that, and it goes all the way with the whole insanity concept. It's pretty fun. I think the most fun I think the fun and creepy part of that game is how it messes with you. Like, you don't know what you see is whether or not you don't know if what you're seeing is reality. Like, is the game messing with me? Is it playing a prank?
Yeah, that was always a fun thing. I remember I've seen it played. I think my brothers played it, and I saw them playing it. And I've of course seen all the videos and stuff about the sanity system.
Oh yeah, it's pretty fun.
Which is really fun.
The graphics were GameCube graphics, and they actually, they could have been better. I think that game was actually intended to be on the N64, so it was in that development. So they finished it up for the GameCube, so that's why it kind of looks like it could have been on N64, but it runs on GameCube just a bit. Let's see. And there's a lot of horror games out there, especially on the PC. You mentioned a lot of
I mean, how obscure do you want me to get with horror recommendations?
Give me the most obscure one. Give me the most obscure one. I'm pretty sure I haven't played it, but tell me about it.
Miasmata?
Miasmata? Which one's that?
Yeah. It's a indie game from, I think, 2012. And it's one of my favorite indie games. Maybe one of my favorite horror games ever. You are on this island, and you have a plague of some sort, and you're being stalked by this weird cat creature. And it's like, there's not a single thing about the game that is like any other game. Like, it has, like, this bizarre movement system where you have, like, real momentum and, like, friction and stuff, so you can actually, like, trip and slide down hills if you're moving too fast.
Oh, cool.
Sort of like, what's that called? Death Stranding, I gather.
The walking simulator.
Yeah, the literal walking simulator. It has botany as a main game mechanic. It has triangulation, like cartography, as a main game mechanic. Yeah, it's wild. It's one of the most unique horror games that I have ever played, and it is just fantastic at what it does. That's
pretty cool. Someone in the chat, Kaiser asked in the chat, what about a Fear in Jericho?
Oh, Fear's fantastic. Oh, can I see the chat, by the way? Where is the chat?
It should be there on the channel.
Where's the channel?
On the stream. Oh, I didn't give you the stream link. Son of
no.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let me give it to you now, I guess.
Sure.
I should have done it before. One moment. Okay. All right. While I do that, now you mentioned.
Oh yeah, Fear. Fear is fantastic. Fear is, in my opinion, one of the best first-person shooters ever made. Mm-hmm. I think that Fear is also a botched horror game, but I think that the atmosphere it creates and the shooting are good enough for me to let it pass.
Yeah.
There
you go. I sent it over on Skype, the link.
Okay.
Okay. But yeah, Fear was pretty fun. It was a good game.
Hold on. And now I'm getting an ad.
It's not much in the chat. It's like actually Kaiser. It's a low show tonight. That's fine. Most people kind of come in afterwards. The real reason why I do it live is pretty much I'm a one-shot, one-take guy. I'd always do these things live, and that way I don't have to go back and edit anything. It's nice.
Yeah,
and when people do pop in, hey, we just talk, we just chill, just hang out. Let's see.
Jericho and Fear, huh?
I guarantee you, if I start talking about baby metal, though, we'll get some viewers.
Jeez. Clive Barker's Jericho is kind of that's definitely in that like sort of 6 out of 10 range of games I have a fondness for. Undying is much better though. Undying is great.
Oh, Undying, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. As far as horror movies go, now you mentioned Texas Chainsaw Massacre is your favorite horror movie.
Yes.
No.
I would say Texas Chainsaw Massacre is my favorite, and that is basically because of the atmosphere it creates.
Mm-hmm.
It is such a dense, unpleasant atmosphere, and also what it does with so little, because it's funny that it's not a very gory film, like, at all. Like, even compared to other movies at the time, it's pretty restrained in what it shows, which makes it feel much more realistic and horrifying than a lot of stuff that was, coming out in the 70s, where you look back at it now and it's just goofy. Whereas Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like a lot of the gore and stuff that happens, it feels realistic because it's not overblown. And also, a lot of what it does is more, again, through that atmosphere and the horrible, like, implications of what it's doing, or like the cruelty of the ideas it's presenting, more than just the overt gore. Like, the dinner scene is like the dinner scene is like more horrifying than anything in any of the slashers that would follow for like a decade.
Right.
Because it's just because of like the screwed up cruelty of the people and the situation. I would say,
right,
in
though.
general,
I just want to say, you're right. A lot of movies, even before Texas Chainsaw Massacre, was pretty brutal. Let's see. I just want to fact check. When did Texas Chainsaw Massacre come out? I think
1974.
74? Okay.
I believe so. Let me check to make sure.
That was 74 or 72. I think 74. I think you're right.
Yeah, 1974. It looks like.
Okay. All right.
And then Halloween was 78.
Mm-hmm.
And Black Christmas was, I can't remember. I think Black Christmas was sort of the one that
74.
Oh, that was 74 also. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was the one that kind of established the slasher films. The arrangement of it in a way.
I think people who know more than me can point to movies earlier that had that formula.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Black Christmas is the sort of recognized as being the one that introduced the formula, and then Halloween is, of course, the one that popularized it.
Right. I mean, Psycho
and then
established
Friday the 13th
slashers
is what further popularized it.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Well, I guess Psycho. It depends on what your definition of slasher is, because I've seen some people who, like they don't count Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Psycho as slashers, for instance. I think it depends with how like nitpicky you want to get about the definition.
Right.
Which I don't know. I don't know what my standards are for. I think in general definitions are. Yeah, I think for me in general, a lot of those genre definitions are much blurrier than people like to admit.
Oh, most definitely.
People will be like, oh, well, if it doesn't have this, it's not this.
I think okay,
how about these 10 things that don't have that and are obviously this?
Right. Like slashers, like you said, what really fits that category? What doesn't? I mean, if Texas Chainsaw Massacre doesn't fit it because Leatherface is using a chainsaw, then and if Psycho doesn't count because most of it's psychological, and then you get to the slashing.
Well, the explanation I've seen is that a slasher, if I remember this correctly, the argument I've seen is that a slasher film involves a killer invading a place of safety for the characters, not the characters going to the killer's abode. Again, not necessarily advocating for that. That's just something I've seen. But yeah, I would say it's funny because slashers and those like gore films don't scare me, like, at all. I've never been frightened of stuff like in the sort of Friday the 13th vein. I find some of that stuff entertaining. I actually just got done with a marathon of all the Friday the 13th movies over the past, I don't know, few weeks. The stuff that scares me is, honestly, found footage. Like,
That explains Texas Chainsaw Massacre a little bit.
I guess so. Yeah,
because they kind of frame it that way. They frame it like it's. I mean, it looks like it is.
I'm really hard pressed to think of a movie that I've come out of feeling really scared. That wasn't part of the found footage genre, which is weird to say because that I think has a bit of a poor reputation among horror fans. And there's some I think are not so great. You know, there's a bunch of schlock in found footage, but it's I think the verisimilitude of the setup, you know, the believability of it, is what makes it for me. Like there's this movie I saw, I don't know, months ago, a year ago, called, what was it, Leaving DC, which I don't think anyone else except for me and Ted of Dread XP have ever watched. But the entire movie most of the movie is just this guy recording stuff at night, like recording weird noises at night, and then going through the recording in the morning and, you know, listening to the weird noises. And it that really gets to me. And I don't know why, but it's like, you know,
because
basically nothing is happening in this movie, and I'm like terrified. Because I think it's because not knowing, like having the implication of something mysterious and sinister and something you don't understand is much more frightening to me than. Well, I could compare it to another found footage horror movie, Grave Encounters, which isn't bad, but it's like a, you know, it's your jump scare, ghosts at the camera sort of thing, and that, you know, that doesn't get to me at all. That's just sort of entertainment.
Yeah, I can get I can get the appeal of found footage. Now, I like pretty much all horror. I appreciate it. And found footage, it does have that realism element. I mean, that's its angle. Some people could say it's a gimmick. Okay, I mean, it is what it is, I suppose. But if you can make it believable,
I think it can definitely more often than not devolve into shaky cam, which is the big, you know, the big thing that everyone throws at it, which is fair. One of my favorites is called The Tunnel, which is an Australian horror film that was, I believe, funded entirely by selling frames of the movie. And that's how they funded it. Wow. And then released on torrent sites, and that was how it was distributed. So actually the only real way to watch that movie now at this point, if you don't want to buy a overpriced DVD version, is to get it on a torrent site, which is completely legitimate because that's how it was originally released.
I have not seen this film. Is it good? Is it worth the trouble?
I believe so. It's the perfect combination of kind of both things. There's a lot of overt horror in the film, but there's a lot of just genuinely creepy stuff happening. And it's all framed as a pseudo documentary, where it's like the footage these people took, but then they're also talking about it, like, you know, in a documentary setting.
Now, does it have like? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, does it have like real gore and like faces of death looking stuff too?
No, it's not really a gore film.
Okay.
No, it's let's see. Think of it were. Think of like the Blair Witch Project, but more happens, and people who survived are giving interviews that get spliced in. That's sort of
okay.
And there's another one called Savage Land, which is entirely a documentary, like a fake documentary. The only like found part of that is just a series of photographs. And so the entire film is just people talking about what happened and talking about what these photographs imply and stuff. That one's actually pretty good. It has a major problem, which is that you know from the beginning that it's a zombie film. And so some of the photos are actually quite good and quite unsettling, except for the fact that they're zombies.
Yeah.
So it's like you're seeing this thing that if you didn't know what it was and it was something other than zombies, you'd be like, holy crap, what is that? Like, you're trying to pick out what the picture, what you're seeing in the picture and stuff. But since it's zombies, you're just like, oh, hey, there's a bunch of blurry zombies.
Yeah, right.
I know exactly how they're probably acting and blah, 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 and all this.
They should have.
I think that's the major failing of it. But
right, I agree. If they didn't frame it that way, it could have been more successful. I would think more believable because what is that thing? It could be some dude on Flocka. It could be some bath salt dude. It could be some creeper.
Yeah. Well, I think it shouldn't have been humans at all. It should have been some
like
sort of
people.
Weird monster, or just some sort of creature. Getting all the. Actually, that's a movie I someday I would love to make. My own fake documentary, and it's just all this fake evidence of some creature in the woods.
Hey, David.
That would be fun.
What do you know about shadow people?
Nothing, I don't think, about shadow people.
Do you know anything
Should I know something about shadow people?
Well, apparently they're everywhere. The shadow people. They lurk around the shadows and they come at you. Have you ever seen the Hat Man?
No, but I remember when I think it was the Moon Sliver was my game. The Moon Sliver was on Greenlight. I think it was the Moon Sliver. Rock Paper Shotgun wrote an article that was highlighting the Moon Sliver and highlighting a game called the Hat Man Shadow Ward. And the point of the article was basically to be like, wow, the Hat Man Shadow Ward looks like garbage. You should look at the Moon Sliver instead. But the reason I remember this is because someone commented on the article, and I don't know why this has always just struck me as hilarious. They were like, I'm really not surprised to hear that the Hat Man Shadow Ward has procedurally generated levels, since it obviously has a procedurally generated title. I mean, no shade to that. I haven't even played the game. It might be great, but just that comment always struck me as really funny, because then you're like, you know what? You're right. It sounds kind of like random words and random places.
This might be it might be fuel for ideas for not Dusk, but maybe something else. Look into the Hat Man. He's
okay.
He dates way before Slender Man. He's people say that you see him as an omen, as a sign to change your life, and if you don't, he's coming for you.
Is he another one that is shows up in photographs like Slender Man, or is he?
I haven't seen any photos, but I heard stories, many stories. People on this podcast, even when it was called the Dead Man's Tome podcast, have talked about Slenderman, or not Slenderman, sorry, the Hat Man and shadow people. Now, I will say this too: shadow people is also kind of linked to meth. So I kind of question. I ask just about any question, and I asked them too. Have you ever done meth? And they always say no. Now, maybe it's because it's live and they don't want to admit. I don't know.
I feel like that's not something that most people will admit on a live stream. Just be like, yeah, I have done meth. In fact, I'm doing some right now.
Right, I hope so. Oh, man. Okay, so before, we're almost at the hour, but do you have anything you're working on now? Anything in the chamber that you're working on? Anything in the hopper?
Main one would be that I'm assisting. Excuse me. I'm assisting with development on Gloomwood, which is a survival horror combo immersive sim sort of game that New Blood is publishing. Headed up by my friend Dylan Rogers, who is also a big horror fan.
Nice.
And yeah, it's sort of like I guess the elevator pitch is that it's Thief with guns, although that doesn't really accurately describe it. It's like a mashup of games like System Shock 2, Thief, Deus Ex, Dishonored, those sort of things, mashed up with Resident Evil style survival horror. And that is coming out someday, hopefully.
But I like that. I like the mashup. I like what you're saying there. I mean, Deus Ex, Thief with guns. And I've not yet have played a New Blood title that was horrible. Okay, I like how they are so different and unique.
Yeah, we've got a pretty good track record so far, and people have like people kind of consider us the boomer shooter developer, which is odd because we've only actually done 2 boomer shooters, and like everything else is definitely not a boomer shooter.
Is Dusk a boomer shooter?
Yeah, Dusk and Medieval are the 2. But then we've also, we have like Unfortunate Spaceman, we have Faith, we have Gloomwood, all this stuff that is very different. But I guess it's because we sort of got our start with Dusk and Medieval.
Now, Dusk, I imagine, has a huge following, right? A pretty decent sized following, like a healthy fandom.
It's decent. It's a I would say a cult game, a cult indie game, which is I'm very satisfied with personally.
And I probably don't know. Okay, I definitely don't know all about like the people that are fans. Are they allowed to like create custom levels and custom stuff and add to it?
Yeah, we're working on an SDK, which is so currently people can make levels for the game using the SDK branch, and they can do some like asset modding. We're hopefully going to get it to the point where it's going to be pretty much entirely moddable, just like Doom or Quake.
Nice.
That's in the process.
Hey, that'd be good. I mean, I don't know how you feel about that, but I've worked for it. I mean, if you don't want to add more to it, you can always leave it to the fans to create more and add more, and whatever the legalities of that is. I mean, I guess you guys settle that, but that way you kind of.
Oh, I mean, there's nothing to settle there. It's just we're very happy with people making whatever they want,
right?
For Dusk, I think the only real limit there is you can't sell your Dusk mod, because
right. That's just fair. That's just fair. It could be like Hedon and selling a Doom mod. I didn't realize Hedon was a Doom 2 mod, or I did not.
Yeah.
So I bought that. And
I still need to play Hedon. Actually, that's one of the ones I haven't played. It was a joke, like internally for a while, because it'd be like everywhere we looked on Steam, just randomly Hedon would be showing up.
Mm-hmm.
We're like, why is this game keep showing up? Like it was just like stalking all of us.
Because the orc waifu. That's why the orc waifu. People like her. That's why I bought the game. Because the way she looks.
The orc waifu, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, oh hell yeah, I gotta play as that. But you see the way she looks in the game, it's like that's not how she looks. But it's okay. We talked earlier about games that start off with a bad level, and that was one that did, because it started off in the cave that was like one texture.
Oh, I see.
And I was like, what am I supposed to do here? And I got totally lost. But that's not Dusk. Dusk starts off great. Starts off amazing. You're not lost at all.
Hold on 1 second. I think a 3-year-old is trying to get into my office. I'll be right back.
It's okay. The 3-year-old was saying, hey, it's almost time. David was generous about this. This was a last-minute booking. I didn't even think this was going to happen. I thought I was going to geek too hard. Too much of a fanboy. I played Dusk quite a bit. I mean, you guys see it. Any game I stream is pretty much either Duke 3D or Dusk.
All right, sorry about that. My daughter woke up.
Hey, it's okay. It's okay. I can kill time just by talking about nothing and everything all at the same time. It's fine. All right. Now, last question before we wrap up.
Okay.
If you could do anything differently with Dusk, what would it be and why? Just the smallest thing or the biggest thing?
not do competitive multiplayer.
Oh, is that bad?
Yeah, that was a giant time sink that was basically worthless because no one plays it, and that's the I don't think we're ever at New Blood going to do competitive multiplayer again, because it was just like, it's a nightmare to try and deal with networking. For Dusk, it was a nightmare because Dusk was not initially set up for multiplayer, and so Dusk World is actually like a branch of Dusk's code, and it was just real pain to develop it, and it's a pain to have to maintain it and stuff too. And it's just, I'm really glad that there are a few people that enjoy it and play it, but it was definitely not worth the time and effort that we put into it, unfortunately.
Okay. See, I have yet to even play the multiplayer.
Yeah, it's Quake 3 on super speed, essentially.
Sweet, I love Quake 3. I'm just too afraid.
It could be pretty fun. It's like super fast.
If I streamed it,
so
I'd reveal to everybody that I'm horrible at the game.
I mean, I'm horrible at it also, honestly. Yeah. Like, there's a reason that I was not as heavily involved with the multiplayer, and that's that I'm really a single-player guy. I'm not good at multiplayer, and I don't usually enjoy multiplayer as much as single-player.
Yeah, it's a different game style, man. Man.
Yeah.
All right, David. Szymanski. Thank you so much for coming on Hard Talk Radio, talking about Dusk, talking about horror games, horror movies. It's great having you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you made it this far, press the like button, share, subscribe, and y'all take it easy.